Well, hello and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. Before I get into today's content, if you're new here, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel, hit the bell so that every time something new comes out, you don't miss it. Also, please introduce yourself in the comments below because we really are a friendly group. And if you hit the subscribe button and you hit the bell, then you will get notified when we roll out new videos that will help you live a happier life with less stress and less pain every Tuesday. Who doesn't want that? I know you do. So if you are new and you don't know me, my name is Terri Cole and I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and the author of Boundary Boss right there, which you can get still at boundarybossbook.com or anywhere that fine books are sold. So thank you so much for all of your questions and your comments. I love to highlight them. And today I'm highlighting one from Iris under the episode about repair and rupture in relationships. This was really divine timing for me. I'm new to having a healthy, committed relationship, and we've recently started having some ruptures. So watching this video gave me a sense of peace and comfort, hearing reassurance that this is normal and also how we can grow. Thank you. Well, thank you, Iris, for being a part of my crew. I super appreciate you. Now let's move into today's content. This is about the impact of childhood neglect on us as adults or on adult relationships. Because what I find that with my therapy clients and the courses that I run is that people minimize neglect. It's like there's confusion about how it impacts us. And I think it is a lot easier if you have an abuse background where you were physically harmed and there was physical pain involved, sexually assaulted, beaten, any of those things. It's much easier to point your finger at that happened to me. I had that experience and I know that impacted me. Where when we're talking about emotional neglect, it's not as cut and dry. It's not as easy to point a finger at because a lot of different things creates neglect. Falls under the category of many different behaviors. And I think that there's confusion as to what that is. Before I even get into the symptoms, let's just talk about how it can happen. If you have overly authoritarian parents, that can create emotional neglect because of their desire for you to succeed or do what they want you to do supersedes their ability to be connected to you. You are neglected. You are not seen in that process. You have straight up parents who are unavailable, whether it's because of drug addiction, alcoholism, abandonment, whether through death. This is another thing that can create that same experience. You can also have it from parents who are too easygoing, too lenient, right? There's a lack of structure for kids sometimes that also can create it. So there's tons of parenting styles and actions that negatively impact us. So let's talk about what is neglect. It is being raised in a way that the adults are either not attuned to where you are emotionally. So it's parents who would give kids pat answers. If the kid was like, I'm upset about this happened in school, the answers were, it's fine, you're going to be fine, you'll wake up feeling better tomorrow. Not pursuing how the kid actually felt. Or, and of course, this runs the gamut from being straight up abusive, where someone's like, well, you deserve that your friend did that to you, to just being uninterested, just not being there. So these are all situations that can create the end result of being neglected emotionally when you were growing up. And I'm going to give you some symptoms now of what happens when these seeds are planted in childhood? How do they come to fruition in adulthood? And then I'm going to give you some ideas of what you can do if you identify with this to really get on that path to healing, because you really do deserve to be on that healing path. All right, hold on. Moving into the first one. So, first one is being hyper independent, right? This is a symptom where people are not trustworthy. If you had emotional neglect in childhood, whichever form it came in, what you learn is that people are not trustworthy. So a lot of times you'll just find yourself not trusting that other people will do what they say they're going to do, really feeling much more comfortable doing everything on your own. Another symptom is disordered or bad boundaries, that it can be very difficult to establish healthy boundaries, because if you were neglected emotionally in childhood, that impacts your self-esteem, your self-worth. If your own family or your parents didn't give you the time or the attention that you wanted, or made you wrong, right? Because again, remember that authoritarian family or the perfectionist family where you focus on the kid gets all A's and 1 B, and there's like an actual discussion on the B, like why did you get a B and not all A's? That type of a thing, again, does not take into consideration that those are parents who are not attuned to the child's effort that it took to get all the A's and 1 B. What's wrong with the B? So perfectionism in parenting is really damaging emotionally, because it's all about achieving and really not about how the kid feels. So bad boundary setting, if you have low self-esteem or you're not sure about your value, it can be really hard to say no, because we end up seeking approval from others. So that's another symptom. An amplified, like a jacked up fear of abandonment or rejection. Because again, if you have this emotional neglect in childhood, it's like there wasn't consistency with the way that people related to you. Like there was no consistency in you being seen. So it's makes you, if you are being abandoned emotionally when you grow up in that circumstance. So it makes sense that you would feel very dialed into if you're remotely thinking someone is about to reject you, but you also can feel triggered or activated, like being hypersensitive to it, where the person might just need space, but actually isn't leaving you, but it can feel like they are. Another sign of this or an end result of childhood emotional neglect is being highly self-critical. So this is having a really loud and mean inner voice. Survivors of childhood emotional neglect, it's like this harsh criticism seems natural. Now, it could be that you had someone in your life who was harsh, but when you don't receive effective and consistent attunement or validation, right, it can really negatively impact the way that you view yourself. So it creates all of this self-doubt, so that highly critical voice can really be incredibly debilitating. And those of you who experience it know exactly what I'm talking about. Another symptom of this is emotional illiteracy, or barely literate emotionally, meaning struggling with your own feelings, struggling to communicate your feelings, not being sure what your feelings are. That's something that I've seen over and over again with clients who had this experience in childhood. Because, think about it, if you felt like your feelings were not valid, if you were not validated, if nobody cared about how you felt, or if you had feelings and they told you your feelings were wrong, you shouldn't feel that way. And a lot of times, this comes through whether the person says it or not, because we all have silent agreements in the family systems that we grow up in. So there was a silent agreement in my home to not really talk about anything bad, nothing that was negative. So it isn't that all feelings were off the table. Feelings of happiness and joy were okay. Even feelings of sadness were okay. But not feelings of nothing that was messy, like anger, forget about it. That was out. So of course, that impacts the way that how valid I thought my feelings of anger were. If no one ever talked about them, and if you had them, that meant something was wrong with you. So of course, it took years of therapy to readjust my relationship to that feeling. So with not knowing your own feelings or being emotionally semi-illiterate, it can be really difficult to know how you feel, and then really difficult to express how you feel. And of course, this impacts your relationships. This impacts friendships. This impacts romantic relationships. Because again, if you don't know how you feel, how readily are you making yourself vulnerable in a real way? Which of course, healthy and voluntary vulnerability, as I call it, is really required for us if we're going to actually have intimate relationships that are intimate. Make sense? Another symptom of childhood emotional neglect can be just low self-esteem, just not thinking that much of yourself, not having a good self-image. Because again, neglect creates this sense of not being valuable. Or even the perfectionist, as we're still calling that neglect, right? If you're in the perfectionist family, that you are only as valuable as your last achievement. So those systems really put so much pressure on a kid that there's no inherent value. A child from that system doesn't feel that they have inherent value just by being alive, just by being a kid. It's what are they achieving, because that is their value, which of course gives you low self-esteem, because we can't all be achieving 24/7. That is not possible. And the last one I want to talk about here is there's lots of shame, blame, and guilt. I mean, listen, most of us, it's normal to experience shame, blame, and guilt sometimes. I mean, shame, I wouldn't say all that much, but guilt and blame, sure. I mean, this is just being a human being. But I have to say, if you had emotional neglect and you're a survivor of this, you may consistently feel these feelings of just being overly guilty and taking blame around, first of all, other people's feelings, but your own feelings, right? If you have feelings and needs, you might feel guilty and ashamed of having them, like there's something wrong with that, or that it's a weakness. And also just feeling guilty, like that just for existing. I mean, think about how much guilt do you experience? So depending on the form of emotional neglect would actually dictate what the triggers are for feeling guilty and shameful. But they are there, and it's exhausting. Do you know how much bandwidth it takes to feel guilty about everything all the time? It's just exhausting. So let's talk about what can you do? What are steps that you can take? First of all, if this is you, I see you. You are so not alone. And I think it's time we stop minimizing what we experienced in childhood if it wasn't great. Abuse does not have to be physical or somebody screaming at you. Neglect is this silent killer of joy. It's like the one that is talked about the least in articles and online. You don't hear that much about it, but it can be so devastating. And there are things that you can do. So let's get to what those things are, because you do not need to live your life feeling this way. It is not necessary. You can definitely at least begin to get on a healing journey. Now, understand that this is a process, right? Any kind of healing is a process. Any kind of changing anything in life is a process. So what is it that you can do? First of all, you've got to be really gentle with yourself. If you have had that inner mean committee for years or decades going to town, we've got to really shift that lens. I really want you to think about yourself and treat yourself and talk to yourself the way that you would a child that you adore. Have you ever loved a child? Like actually that pure love that comes from loving a kid? Not because they're doing anything. They don't need to, make us dinner or throw us a parade. They just exist and we are in love with them. I want you to feel that way and conjure those feelings and seek to curate those feelings about yourself, because you are that lovable. You are that deserving. So that means catching yourself with negative self-talk. That means being awake enough to stop this ingrained habitual thought patterns and behavior. And then saying something nice to yourself, right? You did the best you could. You're a work in progress. I love you anyway. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to change your mind. Because that is the good advice that you would give kids, correct? Yes, it is. Okay. The next thing is to get more literate around your emotions. So you can start small, but you've got to start identifying. So I'm giving you in the downloadable guide, which you can get at terricole.com/guide, I'm giving you a whole bunch of emotions, like the list of emotions that you can choose from, because it's not enough to just know that you're upset. It's like we want to start getting specific, and it might be easier to start with positive emotions. So it isn't just that you're feeling good. Are you feeling joyful? Are you feeling satisfied? Are you feeling, this is the beginning of starting to understand your own emotions, your own emotional states, because you have to know them, because then that positively impacts all of the other, or almost all of the other negative symptoms. Like you can draw boundaries more effectively when you know how you actually feel about something. I also want you to think about getting really dialed into your needs and caring that you have needs, right? What are your desires? What are the things you don't want to do anymore? Let's do a satisfaction inventory. Because I think that as a therapist, I can tell you for sure, when you've had any kind of neglect or abuse, we get really good at just keeping on, where we just go along to get along because it's what we have to do. But you don't have to do that anymore. So let's really dial into, how are you feeling? What needs in your life are going unmet? And what steps can you take to meet them? So I would love to know what you think about this information. Does it resonate with you? I'm also wanted to let you know that I have Real Love Revolution is coming up in January. Speaking of self-love, speaking of self-esteem, this is one of my signature courses. It's a 12-week course. So we hang out together for 3 months. And really, it's all based on the theory. It's for people, if you're single or in a relationship, doesn't matter. But it's all based on my work around real love and this hypothesis that self-love is the only path to any other healthy love. And that is where we begin. And then it goes out from there. I'm incredibly proud of this work. I've had thousands of people go through this course. So if you are interested, all the information will be in the show notes, or you can just go to terricole.com/RLR for Real Love Revolution. Starting in January. I think it's the perfect gift to give yourself for the holidays. No? Yes. Anyway, let me know what you think about this episode. You can tag me on Instagram and let me know, what are your thoughts? I really want to hear from you. I hope that this added value to your life. And as always, take care of you.